but actually I want to talk about your book, How to Raise a Child in a Woke World. How's it been?
I mean, we're not warring against people, but we're warring against the most destructive ideas. We are in a battle when it comes to fighting for our kids and what they think about themselves, what they think about the nature of the world, what they think about their own family relationships, what they think about their bodies.
Yeah.
I mean, this is war, and the other side is relentlessly pursuing our kids, and we need to arm them with good information.
So welcome to the Anna Film Scoop. It's October and we've just celebrated our wedding anniversary, 22 years, which Phelim thinks is not enough years to celebrate or make a fuss of.
Make a fuss of. Yeah.
But we did go out for a nice meal and we did remember 22 years ago. There's some photographs from the big day 22 years ago. I think we've aged very well myself. What do you think, Phelim?
Yes, I totally agree, yeah.
Yes,
I totally agree.
Moving right along. It seems like child abuse and child harm is really just in the eye of the beholder. Or in the eye of government-funded NGOs. We look at the abomination that is the illegal practice of breast ironing and ask, how is it any different from government-funded, trans-promoted practice of breast binding? Yes, you probably guessed the answer to that. And the New York Times decided to again terrify the public with a total non-story. We'll give you a masterclass in how they do this journalism thing.
Yes,
it's really, as in / actually propagandizing, but it's a masterclass in how they do that.
Sarah Lane.
And Phelim, we've had our senator has recently died, Dianne Feinstein.
Yes, the senator for California, the last moderate. Apparently, she's the last moderate Democrat. Wasn't that moderate? Not that moderate, but I think moderate is a funny word now. At least she wasn't crazy. We look at her complex life and her legacy, which is very interesting. I mean, her life was interesting too, you never know what goes on in people's lives too. And I just some details struck me.
Kind of shocking. Yes.
So now we're looking at how you raise balanced children in a crazy world. We interviewed the children's rights activist and author Katy Faust about her new book, which tackles this real conundrum of how to. And we know plenty of people who are
facing that very dilemma.
Sometimes facing is the actual word for it, right in their face. So,
kind of an extraordinary story, and it was brought to our attention by our friend Elizabeth out in Pasadena, who wrote in after we did that section. You'll remember a few weeks ago I talked about breast binding. Breast binding with this way of for very, very confused and mixed up children to flatten their breasts, basically, by binding them tightly.
To stop them becoming a woman, basically.
Yes, just extraordinary. But interestingly, as I said, Elizabeth from Pasadena got in touch with us, a very good friend and fan of the show, and she pointed out something else out in the world, a thing called breast ironing, which is illegal and is described as child abuse. And I thought it was really interesting to just look at what the Metropolitan Police, and just to remember what we talked about before, what breast binding, which is being promoted by all these trans activists. So there's another thing out there in the world that is not being promoted and in fact is illegal and is described as child abuse, and it's called breast ironing. And it's just interesting to read what it is. Here's what the Metropolitan Police in the UK describe it as. Breast ironing, also called breast flattening. Doesn't that sound like binding? Okay. It's when young girls' breasts are damaged over time to flatten them and delay their development. Sometimes an elastic belt or binder is used to stop them from growing. Now, this is a description of breast ironing. Breast ironing can cause serious physical issues such as abscesses, cysts, itching. I'm just going to go through this list. Tissue damage, infection, discharge of milk, breasts becoming significantly different shape, severe fever, the complete disappearance of one or both breasts. And further in this is again from the Metropolitan Police in the UK, it is a form of child abuse. Phelim, you have a question.
Yes, so I think most people, or a lot of people, wouldn't know why you would do breast ironing. In fact, a lot of people mightn't even know why you do breast binding. So you've got these young ladies who have been told at school they could possibly be a boy because they like sports or whatever reason, or they're gay, or they're just confused, or they're mentally ill, And so to stop their breasts developing, they can order binders on the internet, or the school might give them binders to stop their breasts developing.
And as I said before, the last time I dealt with this, lots of NGOs, lots of government-funded NGOs, taxpayer-funded NGOs and charities are giving these away for free, and are teaching children how to do this.
And teaching them not to tell their parents about it. So breast ironing, and this is from the Metropolitan Police. Now, breast ironing, which is not different.
Completely different, obviously.
Yes. And so they say breast ironing usually starts with the first signs of puberty, and is most often done by female relatives. In most cases, the abuser, and that's what they call the abuser, incorrectly thinks they're behaving in the best interest of the child. Does that sound familiar?
Yes.
They believe flattening the breast will make the child less womanly. Sounds like breast binding to me. They hope this will protect the child from harassment, rape, abduction in early first marriage, and help them stay in education. So it's this whole thing. It's for the best interest of the child. So go ahead, Anne.
So meanwhile, I say, this is just extraordinary. Meanwhile, over in the unregulated NGO land, so you've now heard of this awful thing, this breast ironing, which sounds very like breast binding. But anyway, so here's what the NGOs, meanwhile, while the United Nations, by the way, go on about breast ironing, meanwhile, in a universe not far away, you have these NGOs promoting something that sounds an awful lot to me like breast ironing. Here's what they're saying, and it's all very hip and it's all very hip and nice colours and everything. Here's one of their leaflets: how to bind your chest, tips, tricks and safety while binding. And it goes on, you can practice a number of deep breathing exercises throughout the day. They're telling you how to do this. For many people, chest binding can open up a whole new world of gender affirmation, especially for transgender men, trans-masculine and other non-binary folks. But it's important to know how to bind safely. Here is a quick guide to help you get a flat chest and stay safe, right? On and on and on. And I love the fact, by the way, that this NGO, and this is just one of many NGOs that are sending out information, by the way, to students. It's written by it comes from Wild Seed Wellness, and from a person called Ana Maria Alero Yonanis, who is a body worker, Phelim. A body worker. First time I've ever read that was today. A body worker. So this lovely person, I'm sure, a fabulous person, Maria. I'm sure she was born Maria, by the way, as well. I'm sure she was. This particular person is teaching you how to do the binding safely. And here's one of the things from that leaflet. Is chest binding safe? There are some health concerns and side effects related to binding, but luckily all of these can be managed. So very interesting, minimising any harm, nothing wrong with it at all. But you know what I thought when I was reading all of this information from the body worker, which I think is a way of basically very clearly this is not a doctor. So I thought, Phelim? I thought, let me go and look at a reputable medical source and find out what a reputable doctor would say about this. So I went over to the Cleveland Clinic and found out, what are the Cleveland clinics saying about this? And their transgender health specialist, Dr. Henry Ning,
NG.
MD. Henry Ning, MD. And here's what he says. There's currently very little data for doctors to draw from when it comes to overall safety of chest binding. Shocker. The data is small. There has simply not been a whole lot published in scientific or medical literature about the experiences and outcomes of binding. He points to a 2018 study that identified the possible negative effects of chest binding. And I'm going to just give you some headlines here of some of the possible negative effects. Skin and tissue related issues, acne, fungal infections, itching, scarring, swelling. Pain in your chest, shoulders, back and or abdomen. Your breasts are full of nerves, so it's not uncommon for people who use chest binders to experience pain from squeezing them down, Dr. Ning says. Respiratory issues, shortness of breath is another common side effect, especially among people who are overweight or have large breasts. Less common respiratory issues include cough and respiratory infections. Having a restrictive device around you makes it harder to breathe. Shocker. You know something, Phelim? I didn't go to medical school and I could have guessed that.
I think they're putting the cart before the horse here.
I know. People who have asthma or breathing problems shouldn't bind during an acute illness and should instead wear different types of clothing, hopefully. This is again from Dr. Ning, medical doctor at the Cleveland Clinic.
I think the desire to bind is an acute illness.
Musculoskeletal issues. I'm only getting going, Phelim, on the list of risks here. Musculoskeletal issues, very tight or frequent chest compression, can result in severe side effects. Loss of muscle mass, postural changes, rib fractures, shoulder popping. Oh, and what about neurological issues? Though less common than other side effects, neurological effects may include dizziness, headaches, lightheadedness, numbness.
This is the good chest binding.
This is fantastic chest binding. This is the problem with this is the chest binding that is being recommended, approved of, and this is just a little side effect.
I was just getting confused.
This is just a little
side effect. What do you call the other one? The other one is called
chest ironing.
Breast ironing.
Breast ironing.
But this is chest. What's chest binding?
Yes.
Breast binding.
Yes.
I'm confused. But
it goes on, but it just goes on. And I love this, by the way. Does everyone experience, and I mean, the list it's almost worth, we'll put them in the notes. I mean, it's actually worth reading the whole thing. Does everyone, here's from Dr. Ning again, does everyone experience side effects? The 2018 study, basically the only study they have, which isn't a brilliant study anyway, found that 88.9, so basically 89% of respondents experienced at least one negative side effect. But let's do it anyway. So most people found it was negative to their health. But you know what? They decided to do it anyway. And I love this bit at the end here where Dr. Ning says, in the Cleveland Clinic, binders might do the job and provide a desirable outcome, but they're currently not regulated. Now he's saying that with the knowledge that 89% of people suffer negative effects from doing this. And he's going to go ahead as a medical doctor to tell you how to do it. Even without concrete medical data, this is from him, even without concrete medical data, I have to repeat that, Dr. Ning says there are some general guidelines to follow for safe chest binding. So I'm just going to make it up. Let me translate that for you. We've basically got no information, but you know what? I'm going to make up a few things that kind of sound maybe okay, because I really have no idea, because there's actually no evidence. And he just goes on and on and on, and it's just it comes to an end, by the way. And I have to read this bit, you know. This is again from Dr. Ning. This is again from the Cleveland Clinic. Many transgender folks never undergo gender affirmation surgeries, but in talking to your care provider about chest binding, you may discover that masculizing chest surgery, sometimes called top surgery, by the way, to you and me, it's called a double mastectomy, is an avenue you'd like to explore. So there he goes, acknowledging that by doing this, you're introducing the idea of actually doing complete massive damage to yourself by having a double mastectomy that you don't need. Speaking with your healthcare provider is an opportunity to explore other options and opportunities, Dr. Ning says. Oftentimes when patients come in to talk about their discomfort or problems of binding, that information ends up being part of our medical rationale for why a particular surgery is medically necessary, as well as life-saving for that individual. Here's what I've got to say to you, Dr. Ning from the Cleveland Clinic. There is no evidence to suggest that gender surgery saves anyone's life. None. Because the information on suicide, which is what he's hinting at there, this suicide thing that is constantly being used and threatened on parents, has no basis in scientific fact. None. And in fact, the evidence coming out of Tavistock was that people who had surgery were more likely to be suicidal than the people who hadn't. So there is...
Tavistock is a UK clinic.
The Tavistock is the UK clinic that was closed because of serious questions that were being asked and that they couldn't get an answer to.
And if people turn up with mental difficulties, the solution is not to breast bind or to cut their breasts off. I would humbly suggest, but then I'm not a medical expert with the Cleveland Clinic.
Yeah, but I think as time goes on, this thing of being a medical expert is losing all of its weight. So just to remember, in summary of this story, that there is in the world, there is a thing called breast ironing, which the United Nations, the Metropolitan Police, governments in every civilized country around the world have all agreed is a terrible, terrible, terrible thing, and child abuse. It's called child abuse. And the description of it is bizarrely, Phelan, exactly the same as the description for what is now being pushed in schools. This is why I thought this was worth bringing. So I would by the way, very much thank our friend in Pasadena, Elizabeth, for bringing my attention to this story, because it really is one that we need to attend to and watch out for. And people need to ask more questions about what's being taught in schools.
Totally.
Moving right along, Phelim.
Talking of what's being taught in schools.
The New York Times had an extraordinary, big, massive headline the other day, which really caught my imagination. It caught my attention because, as you know, we made a documentary called
Fracking.
What was Frack Nation about, Phelim?
Fracking.
Shocker.
Let's watch the trailer to that.
Let's do that.
These people are campaigning against fracking for natural gas. Well, I'm a journalist and I wanted to find out if they were telling the truth. What could possibly go wrong?
Excuse me.
You think it's appropriate to...
Okay, that's it.
Hey, people's escort, get the out of here. Hey.
There's blood.
No, this is bull. I'm sick and tired of this.
I am armed, I will tell you that.
You're armed.
This little teaser.
I have to say, we're very, very proud of that documentary.
Yes.
So the other day in the New York Times, big headline, and this is very instructive of everything this is everything that's wrong with the New York Times.
And by the way, the research world as well.
And the research world, in fact. So here's and I love this. The very dramatic language, by the way. The headline, the subheading. What do you call that, by the way? There, what's that called?
That's like the mini headline.
Mini headline. Uncharted waters.
Or that's the series name. Yeah.
I could do that. We could do the. We could put on the Jaws music now. Uncharted waters.
Dum, dum.
Monster fracks are getting far bigger and far thirstier. And of course, the word monster film is not a friendly word, is it? No. So monster, so scary. Then underneath that headline is giant, again, not a very friendly word, giant new oil and gas wells that require astonishing volumes of water to fracture bedrock are threatening America's fragile aquifers.
Can I just say, if you didn't know anything, they do sound astonishing, but...
Yeah, I'm getting to that.
The New York Times journalist knows things.
Yes.
Because they've got a thing called Google.
The old Googling, you see. A Times analysis found that these new wells can consume millions, gazillions of gallons of water, often taken from dwindling aquifers. And what they're almost doing there is, they're almost making the aquifer, they're anthropomorphizing the aquifer by saying the fragile aquifer, the little wounded, the dwindling little aquifer, the little baby aquifer. Oh, don't kill me. So wait till you hear why we're making fun of the New York Times. So here, I'm just flicking down through this film, and you're going to see exactly.
No, there's the stats. There's the stats.
No, here we go. This is it. Yes, nationwide. So here's the big part of the story, and this comes up almost immediately. Nationwide, fracking has used up nearly 1.5 trillion gallons of water since 2011. So divided by 12, it's 125 billion gallons a year, which by the way is massive. Oh my God, Phelim. It's shocking, right? So woo, right? So fracking uses 125 billion gallons a year. So let's look at what golf courses use. So golf courses in America use 2.8 billion gallons a day. So what I then did, because I'm really good like this now, I got brilliant at this, I multiplied that by 365 to find out how much they use per year. So when you do that, you find out that golf courses use 1.22 trillion gallons a year. So 1.22 trillion versus 125 billion, and I've got the math on this, and again, you can please correct me. Basically, it's 3 times more water used on golf courses than on fracking. Now, but sure, is there any benefit to fracking, Phelim? Look at the pleasure that golf gives so many people. And by the way, that would be an interesting statistic. The percentage of people in America who benefit from golfing, I would say it's a small percentage. But I would say, and I'm going to go out on a limb here, Phelim, that the number of people who benefit from fracking in America is a very large percentage.
Well, I mean, for example, since fracking started, America has not been involved in a foreign war to secure energy supplies. Since fracking started, Putin stopped the supply of oil and gas to Eastern Europe, and the lights did not go off.
Yes.
The lights did not go off. Now, it was lucky but fracking played a large part in that. The price of oil and gas did not go through the roof. Now it's high, but it could have gone up to $200-300 a barrel. But it remained relatively stable at 60-70. Now it's gone up to 100, but that is again because of fracking. And it didn't vastly increase the inflationary pressures that everyone, and we know that everyone is under. That doesn't also farmers. It's revitalized farming in some of the poorest parts of the country because farmers are getting royalty fees. It's revitalized, as you say, hairdressers. You know, car salesmen, housing.
But I think the energy security part of the picture is massive. It has made America energy self-sufficient, and that's a very big power, which apparently a lot of people are hell-bent on taking away from America. So we're going to come back to this, because for me this is a huge story, this water story, because people are going to continue to terrorize people with untruths about this water story and what's actually true. And by the way, when we started to dig into this, and we are going to dig into this more, and we're going to get a hydrologist on here, but what I think is very interesting, and you can try this at home as well if you want, is to look up and find out the recent uses of water, of all of the water, statistical use of water in America. And you will find it incredibly difficult, as we did, to find any information that doesn't go back, that anything
from the last 10 years.
From the last 10 years, basically. You can't find anything.
So they've stopped studying it. My looking at this is, like, there's EPA, US freshwater withdrawals, 2010. So once fracking started, they wanted people to sell a story that it's destroying the water table. So that's why they've done no new analysis of where the water is what's using the water. Because back in 2010, 45% of the water is for hydrothermic, i.e. dams. Thermoelectric dams to create power. 32% for irrigation for agriculture. For
farming.
12 for public supply, the drinking. Now it says 5 self-supported industrial. We don't know what that is, but maybe that's fracking. That wasn't fracking then. And then a smaller 2% mining. So you can see the fracking.
It's what you say, Philip, very often. They've suddenly become very incurious. They have this incurious thing, and when you read, if you train, which we've trained, to work out how to read the New York Times and not go nuts. And when you have trained as hard as we have, you will very quickly realise they don't like context, because context ruins the story for them. So what they do is they'll say something that's really shocking, give no context, and that's why it remains shocking. If it got any context, you'd go, it's a nothing burger, and therefore it wouldn't be a news story. No. So this is the problem. So anyway, Dianne Feinstein died, Philip.
Yes, and I've never been a fan of this. You shouldn't say anything was negative
about the dead.
Yes, but and funny, I was probably thinking I should say something. She's a Democrat, but it's funny. This just struck me as I was reading a lot about her life. You never know where people are coming from, and you never know what's going on in people's lives. And these lines from one of her obituaries just struck me. She had a life of privilege, but boy, did she have a tough upbringing. I mean, you see her there in the Senate, ruling the roost. This is a line from, I think it's from the LA Times. Her father was a mild-mannered, scholarly, and a perfectionist. The latter trait he passed on to his eldest daughter, Dianne Feinstein. Her mother could be volatile, flying into mystifying rages. Feinstein, the eldest of 3 girls, told a reporter that her mother chased her around the dining room table with a carving knife. Her sister Lynn's first memory was their mother attempting to drown her in the bathtub. We lived in a great deal of fear, Feinstein once said. Whatever we did, we couldn't please her. And they lived with that. Imagine, they lived in one of the most affluent parts of San Francisco, but that's what was going on
behind the door.
And apparently, the mother was later diagnosed as suffering from brain damage caused by encephalitis and made worse by alcoholism. The night before Feinstein was due to take her SATs, her mother kicked her out of the house. She spent the night in the family car prepping for the exam, and she got into Stanford. I don't know why I'm saying that. It just struck me as I had my mind made up about Dianne Feinstein. She's supposed to be a moderate, but there wasn't an abortion she didn't like. But her legacy is her legacy is complicated, and her politics are complicated. She was massively anti-crime. She became the mayor of San Francisco on an anti-crime budget. She was pro-death penalty. She was opposed to open borders massively. I suppose she was the last moderate Democrat, if you would call being in favour of abortion moderate. But in all these other issues, she was not like the crazies of today. And she flaunted her support for the death penalty, particularly when running for California governor.
Back in 1990.
Back in 1990, and she, as one report says, she flaunted it in front of. She got boos while running for governor, but she flaunted it because she that's just what she believed. You never know what's going on in people's lives, and you have to judge them by what they do. And she did a lot of bad things. She fought hard until the end to try and make the Democratic Party slightly less crazy. I think she failed, but rest in peace, Dianne Feinstein. Next, what's on the show next? Apparently, Hamilton creator Lin-Manuel Miranda went to Congress last week to push for a taxpayer-funded bailout for failing theatre companies across the country, and he wanted a new bill that would earmark $500 million annually for 5 years for non-profit stages. And we've made plays. We made Ferguson. We made FBI Lovebirds. We made Gosnell, and these are all verbatim plays.
And we did Mermaids versus the Alliance in London, which will be coming to a screen near you soon.
And so that was offering real money. We were renting these stages and real money to actors and actresses and box office and all that. So FBI Lovebirds theatre cancelled 6 days before the event.
Yep.
Ferguson, Gosnell, again, theatre cancelled 10 days before the event in New York.
London, we had a huge problem finding a venue in London. Eventually found a place.
We were trying to do a big project in Washington DC, and no theatre will rent their premises to us. None, zero. And they're down the street then begging money
from taxpayers.
But we're actually offering them money. We're saying, here, we'll even pay you in advance. So. And then I love the idea that the briefing was organised by a group called the Professional Non-Profit Theatre Coalition, formed by the former Oregon Shakespeare Festival artistic director Natiki Garrett. During her troubled tenure, Garrett's commitment to far-left political activism alienated numerous donors and ticket buyers, hastening the festival's near-death financial crisis. They were so woke that it destroyed the Oregon Shakespeare Festival.
Hilarious. Oh, yeah.
But look... You even look at LA.
Even Oregon.
But LA, all the theatres are closed. Their seasons, the one beside us, the Mark Taper Forum, the one in Culver City, the Kirk Douglas one, they're all closing or being closed for a season because they can't afford, because people aren't coming back after COVID. I remember during COVID saying, once we get by, I'm going to go to museums more often, I'm going to go to the theatre more often. But they became so woke, I can't go. Why would I go and have my values insulted? It's not even challenged, by the way. It's just insulted. They're now at the level of insulting as opposed to challenging. Don't mind a bit of challenging. So, listen, don't please. If you meet any rhino Republican who might be your congressman who thinks, oh well, maybe I'll
give money to the theatre.
Show how cool I am by giving money to the theatre.
Please don't.
Tell them, please don't.
Please don't. We're going to go over to our interview now with Kathy, right? With
Katy Faust. She's a children's rights activist. She's just written a new book called Raising Conservative Kids in the Woke City, teaching historical, economic and biological truth in a world full of lies. This is an interview recorded earlier. We'll go over that interview right now. It's very, very interesting. Let's go over that interview now. So I'm joined now by Katy Faust. She's a children's rights activist, a writer, a mother, and a pastor's wife from Seattle, Washington. She's the founder and president of Them Before Us, which is an organization that fights for children's rights. The reason we have her on today is because of her new book, co-authored with Stacey Manning, which is called Raising Conservative Kids in a Woke City, teaching historical, economic, and biological truth in a world full of lies. Thank you for joining the show, Katy.
It's a joy to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
We're particularly glad to have you on because we have, our colleague Magda, who has a young son. She's in all these moms groups, and all the parents we know in LA, which is a lot less than it used to be, because let me tell you, the way they have tried to raise a child in a woke city is to get the kid out of the woke city, right? That is a big thing that they're doing now. But all the WhatsApp groups, all the text groups, they're all about how to raise a child in a woke world. I mean, that is the thing that gets the most bandwidth in these groups among women and men of that age who have young children. So we're particularly pleased to be talking to you. So tell us, I mean, it's very timely, isn't it?
Well, and we wrote the book because we're having all those conversations too. You know, we're in the group chats with people going, oh my gosh, this happened at my kid's school. Or, oh, you know, my woke cousin came to visit and said this, this, and this. Or, hey, this got shown to my kid on the playground. Or, I don't know what to do about this. Well, there's one of the dads on my kid's soccer team just transitioned and now he's a mom on the sideline. And I'm not sure how to talk to my kid about this. I mean, this is the conversation every parent is having in America today. And it's happening whether or not you're in a woke city, whether you're in a conservative state, whether your kids are homeschooled, private schooled, public schooled. Every parent is asking these questions. And you know, what we did is we said, look, we're raising our kids in what is probably the most extreme scenario. We're in a very, very progressive city, Seattle, and we've largely sent our kids to public school. We've got 7 kids between us, between my co-author and I, who are between elementary school and college. And the 7 of them have been able to stand firm, identify the lies, push back against aggressive adults, and have a pretty robust understanding of this worldview, even though it's not reflected in the people around them. So what we did is we took the principles that we've used to instill our worldview in our kids, and we've said, you can do this too, regardless of where you live.
I want to ask you, how did you get involved in that? You've got a not-for-profit, them and us, and it's about children's rights. And back in my previous life, I happened to know a lot about children's rights because myself and Anne, we did a lot of work on international adoption of children from the other end. We lived in Romania. We have made several documentaries about the subject. We have been to Indonesia. We've investigated it in Vietnam, in China, in Bulgaria, in Russia. We know more about it. In the end, we had to give it up because it was such a bad news story. But tell us about children's rights and tell us about what you think children's rights are, and then we'll get to how that now comes on to how to raise a child in a woke city.
I'm very passionate about 2 things. When it comes to the way that culture, law, and technology are changing in the world, I'm very passionate about don't touch the kids. Leave the kids alone, right? Kids have these fundamental natural rights to be known and loved by both their mother and father. And massive changes in our laws, in our technology, and in our culture are threatening children's rights to their mother and father, and in essence, turning them into accessories. So the nonprofit is all about marriage and family. Every marriage and family issue, whether it's the definition of marriage, divorce, same-sex parenting, sperm donation, egg donation, surrogacy, adoption, polygamy, cohabitation, anything that intersects with marriage and family, our nonprofit says, first, we consider the best interest of the child. And then we insist that all adults, single, married, gay, straight, fertile, and infertile, conform to the rights of the child. So that's the nonprofit. And our first book, Them Before Us, Why We Need a Global Children's Rights Movement, functions as a manual for that movement.
Now, my memory was that people are now no longer talking about the best interest of the child, even though some conventions still talk about the best interests of the child, because I could decide that the best interest of in a child is that it's raised in a polygamous household. But if a child has a right to a mother and a father, then my idea of the best interests does not supersede that. Are you going with the rights of the child or the best interests of the child?
So children have concrete rights, natural law given rights that need to be protected and defended. And we're pretty familiar with the most primary right of all, their right to life. And just because somebody has a desire or thinks it's in the adult's best interest to annihilate that child's right, you don't get to override fundamental natural rights just because an adult has an interest in overriding that right. So we actually do make a very strong case that these are actual natural rights that children have to be known and loved by both people responsible for their existence. It is also in their best interest. And so those 2 things absolutely can be used concordantly in this conversation about marriage and family. And you're exactly right. I am, broadening out in terms of children's rights. I am very grateful that there is a parental rights movement in this country, but it is insufficient for child protection because a parental right to direct their child's education and medical care, for example, they might think I have a right to chemically sterilize my child in the sense of advancing a transgender identity. And our answer, they may say, I have a right to take my child to drag queen story hour or whatever it is. We say, no, children have fundamental rights. And I would summarize those primary child rights today that are most under attack as their right to life, their right to their mother and father, their right to innocence, and a right to bodily protection. And so even if an adult thinks that they have a right to violate any of those fundamental child rights, the answer is no, you don't. I think that we need to start to make a robust case on behalf of children's fundamental rights. And that will at some points override or conflict with parental interests. Never truly parental rights, but parental interests may run afoul of these primary child rights.
It's a very radical idea, that, by the way, that parents don't have rights over their children. And of course, as conservatives, we all think they do have rights over the children, and they do have rights, but I think the children will be best protected if we say that the child has rights.
Right, because these days, anything somebody really, 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 really wants is conveniently framed as a right. But when we talk about rights, we're talking about natural rights, the same kind of basis that Martin Luther King Jr. used to argue for equal rights on behalf of our Black brothers and sisters. There is a philosophy of thought that can direct us towards moral universals simply by looking at the natural world. And so from that, we see that all men are created equal. We see that all people have a right to life, that children have a right to life. And that same system can tell us that children have a right to their mother and father. That same system says parents have a right to their own children, but not at the expense of child rights. Rights, and what you said is so important, that to properly understand rights, you actually have to see that there's a correlating duty and responsibility with those rights. So parents have a responsibility and a duty to bring up their children, but not in ways that violate children's fundamental rights. Just because an adult has a desire to, for example, force a child out of existence through abortion, they don't actually get to override children's right to life because they have an interest in their own desires or their own agenda. So that's why I'm saying I think children's rights and framing these major culture war issues that we are facing today as fundamental rights of children actually offers not just clarity, but a seamless garment of child protection that all kids need, whether or not their parents understand the best interest of the child in terms of maintaining those rights.
It's very, very important issue because on the face of it, it's not a very conservative thought, right? You are the parents and you have control over your children. I wish parents had more control over their children sometimes, but to ensure that your child is protected from the state, by the way, as much as from wayward parents. If you imbue the child with rights, then it is the ultimate protection of that child. And if you don't, and that's not to say that children shouldn't be taken from parents. We're not saying that. In fact, if the child's rights are not being looked after, the child for its own protection should be removed from parents, and possibly should be removed from a lot more parents than they are. So we've got a rights-based model, and I'd love people may disagree with it, and I'd love them to try and ask us questions in the comment section of the YouTube, because I'm probably shocking a lot of people, but we're both probably shocking a lot of people by saying children should have rights and parents should not have absolute control of their children.
I understand why people have a hard time with this, because the left has adulterated the term children's rights to smuggle in child-harming ideologies in the name of children's rights, like a child's right to sexual pleasure, or a child's right to access testosterone from Planned Parenthood, or a child's right to have a sexual identity hidden from them at school. Those are not children's rights. it's very important to properly define what a children's rights is. And when we do, what we see is they perfectly complement parental rights, but do not permit adults to violate children's rights because adults are categorizing their right improperly.
Just go for the sake of clarity, elucidate the rights that you say you think a child should have again.
I wrote about this in a Newsweek article earlier this year called How the GOP Can Become the Party of Children. And really, every major culture war issue that we are facing today runs through the intersection of child protection. And so the 4 areas of child rights that I think are under attack right now is their right to life. And that is happening in the abortion industry, but it's also happening broadly in the reproductive technology industry. Children's right to their mother and father, which is under assault by every form of modern family. Children's right to innocence, that is a mind that is not being assaulted by explicit content. So that can be through like radical identity destroying sex ed, or taking kids to a drag queen story hour, or being presented with materials or media that violates their innocence, pornography. And then children's bodies need to be protected. They need to be protected in sex segregated spaces when it comes to locker rooms or changing rooms or bathrooms. It needs to be protected in sex segregated sports. Children's bodies need to be healthy and they need competition in sports, and they should be able to be free to compete. Little girls without competing against biological boys or men. And then their bodies, their bodily integrity needs to be protected by not being cosmetically or surgically altered to fit a transgender identity. So to me, you can look at really all of the major issues that we're facing today, and what unifies the largest swath of Americans is child protection. That you can allow adults to make decisions they want about their own romantic relationships, but don't force a kid to lose their mother or father to be in that relationship. You can have adults who choose to identify as transgender, but don't give a mastectomy to a kid, a double mastectomy to a 15-year-old girl. So I think children's life, family, mind, and body are the areas that we need to focus on when it comes to child protection. We need to do this in our personal lives, but we also need to advance policy that protects these child rights as well.
Okay, I could talk more about it. I have some questions for you, but I want to talk about your book, How to Raise a Child in a Woke World. You live in Seattle. How's it been?
We're not warring against people, but we're warring against the most destructive ideas that you can confront. And it's not just Seattle. I know friends who are in red states and kids who are homeschooled, and it's making its way to them too. But yeah, like we are in a battle when it comes to fighting for our kids and what they think about themselves, what they think about the nature of the world, what they think about their own family relationships, what they think about their bodies. This is war, and the other side is relentlessly pursuing our kids, and we need to arm them with good information.
Well, how can you protect the kids from the bad ideas, and how can you give them good ideas?
Well, that's exactly what we've got 10 chapters about, honestly. It is, what are the timeless parenting principles that we can apply to our current day moment to make sure that our kids are not captured by this progressive worldview. And we talk about it in the book like a virus. Think about COVID, like it's going to come for us all at some point. What can you do to inoculate your kids against the woke virus that is seeking them out in media, in their friend groups, in the school curriculum, sometimes in your extended family, maybe in your church if you're going to a church that is not zealous about truth. And so what we do is we kind of build out this framework of what principles specifically do you need to teach them about? There's certain principles that are explicitly under assault today. And those are the areas you need to drill down with your kids, okay? And then we talk about at what ages and what stages do you introduce your kids to these different ideas that need to be conserved, right? And that's what we mean by conservative. We are teaching our kids not just to be against the woke or against leftism. We're teaching them to be for the best ideas that need to be conserved. So we offer quite a bit of explicit instruction on What do you do in elementary school? What do you do in middle school? What do you do in high school? How practically can you hand off? We kind of give this discipleship handoff view of how can you hand off slowly and faithfully and strategically hand off your worldview to your kids. So by the time they are in high school and graduate high school, they have a lot of experience understanding the world, pushing back on the world, dissecting bad ideas, articulating their own good ideas. They understand how to do this, whether or not they're standing alone.
I mean, do you recommend banning smartphones, banning TV? I mean, you may spend an hour at the dinner table and you may take them to church on Sunday for a few hours and you may talk to them, but a lot of them are getting TikTok 3 or 4 hours a day. Other kids, their parents, they're at school 8 hours a day. So what can, practically, what do you recommend? No phones?
At minimum, no phones in elementary school. And then after that, because why not? Why not? Why is it such a big deal? Because you are the primary educator of your child. Whether or not you're sending them to public school, private school, or you're homeschooling them, the first thing you need to know is you are the program. You are the educator. You have got to be the one that is the dominant voice in your kid's head when it comes to everything about worldview, parent-child relationships, male-female, life, freedom of religion, race, history of America, economics, all of these different things. You are the primary educator. Those are the things that are distinctly under assault right now in America. So you have got to be the one that your kid considers to be the authority on all those different topics. One of the main ways that you establish yourself as the authority in your children's world about all these controversial issues is you get to them first. You are the first one to talk with them about transgenderism or chemical abortions or same-sex marriage or socialism or whatever it is. And if you hand your kid a smartphone, really you are losing your ability to be the one that gets to your kids first about these topics. Next, in elementary school, the big thing that you're emphasizing is truth and beauty. In that stage of child development, you're filtering out the distortions of the world. You're filtering out the lies that the world is telling them about their bodies, about marriage, about the free market, about founding principles, about race, right? What you're doing in the elementary school years is, as much as possible, you're saturating your kids in truth and beauty, because developmentally, they're not at an age where they're able to critically think through competing ideas.
Well, no, but when you say you're saturating your children, how do you saturate them? I mean, do you not get a lot of eye rolling?
So that's the thing, is like you will get eye rolling if you're doing it in middle school or high school. Okay. You get a lot of eye rolls in middle school or high school because they've moved into a new developmental phase. But in elementary school, up until the time they're about 10 or 11, think about it, like that's called the sponge phase. Have you noticed that your kids just can sponge up? They come home from Awana and they've got 15 Bible verses memorized. Do they necessarily understand all of them? Maybe not, but they just consume and absorb. And that is why this is the phase where you need to stuff them full of truth and beauty. You do that through conversations. You do that through media, right? Exposing them to great media, cutting out damaging media. One of the biggest ways that I've done it with my kids is I am a bit of a podcast junkie, and I will listen to 2 to 4 hours of podcasts a day, usually at like 1.5 speed. And all through their elementary school years, I was listening to Christian podcasts. I was listening to conservative podcasts. I was listening to conservative cultural podcasts, analyzing what was happening in the culture. And I would do it when I was cooking dinner. So if they were in the kitchen with me for the hour or hour and a half when I was cooking or cleaning, they were also hearing all the conservative Christian content that I was hearing. So even if it's not direct conversations, if you are listening to it, conservative or Christian parent, let your kids listen to it too. If you are watching a great documentary, let your kids watch a great documentary too. Just pull them into what you're already doing. It doesn't take a special book or curriculum or a camp or anything like that. If you are plugged into these issues, pull them in so that they are hearing what you're doing. Now, what you said is exactly right. You will get the eye rolls if you miss this developmental window of stuffing them full of truth and beauty. Now, and here's the other thing. The left understands this phase of child learning where they sponge everything up. That is why they are working so hard to get this radical sex and gender curriculum into K through 5th grade schools, because kids can't sort it out. They are going to simply adopt whatever an adult that they like tells them is true about the world. So you also have to understand this developmental phase and use it to your advantage. You stuff your kids full of the true and the beautiful. Don't let the schools know how to do this, right? The radical activists are already trying to get to kids younger and younger because they understand they can't filter it out. So you do it first. You do it best. And then in middle school, that is when you introduce your kids to the woke distortions. We tell our kids, we expect you to be experts about abortion, homosexuality, socialism, critical race theory, the 1619 Project. Like, once kids get to middle school, they will roll their eyes if they're like, yes, I know, boys and girls are different, Mom. Yeah, I know. But when you say, you know what, we're going to study all of the comorbidities that often lead to somebody to adopt a transgender identity, and then we're going to study the impact that puberty blockers have on kids. And let's read some testimonies of people that were on testosterone for 2 or 3 years and how it destroyed their uterus. And now that they had their uterus removed and they don't have ovaries anymore, now they have to be on hormones, whether or not they identify as a boy or girl. I mean, like, in middle school, your kids are ready for that kind of equipping. So we are just saying you can leverage these developmental phases of child development to get the worldview into your kids.
I think what you're saying is communication is key at the early age. Actually, you're right. Just fill them full of information, and then that lays a foundation where you can shovel information, real arguments and real, because they're going to be getting information from other places. And if you can feed them then, if their minds are open, they've got a solid foundation, then there may be a chance of saving them.
There's not just a chance. You actually can make your kids into warriors, that they have so much confidence. They don't back down. They're not intimidated. I mean, it is scary. I think all of our high schoolers especially have had times where they've had to stand alone. But it has forged in them a courage and a confidence that, you're not going to get if you're just insulated the whole time. I mean, that challenge is going to come for you. It may as well happen while you're under your parents' roof and deeply connected to them.
Great way to end the podcast. Thank you, Katy. Thanks for coming on the show. And we will see you next week on the Alan Phelan Scoop. Katy, where can people get your book?
Raising Conservative Kids in a Woke City is at Amazon and all the places where books are sold. ThemBeforeUs.com is the place to come and subscribe so you can stay up on all of our global children's rights activism. So that's Raising Conservative Kids. We'll put that in the letter we send to all our listeners. We'll put it in the show notes on the YouTube. So please read the book. If you're in this market, if you're in this world, if you're a grandparent, you possibly should give it to your children who are struggling. You can be sure, as you say. And by the way, we could have talked all day. Moving to Mississippi is no guarantee that this will not affect you. They're coming for you there. It's like, as you say, it's a virus. That's exactly right. Katy, thank you very much, and we will see you all next week. Thanks, Phelan.